Hi, I'm Steven, and what am I doing? Today I'm going to shorten some bar stools so they could sit more comfortably at a kitchen height counter. Let's take a look. Here's the bar stools. An acquaintance of mine has a couple of bar stools that are tall. They're made for a bar height tall counter, but if you want to use them at the kitchen counter, as they do, they're uncomfortable because they sit too high. If you look at the yellow tape that I've marked here, the top of this tape is at 36 inches. That's typical for a kitchen countertop to be at that height. And with the thickness of a countertop, you'll see that brings it down to about 35 inches. So you'll see there's only 5-6 inches worth of space here for you to sit in, and that's an uncomfortable position when sitting with your legs that close to the countertop. So what we want to do is take these stools down a little bit, shorten them so that they will sit more comfortably at a kitchen counter height. There's a few things that we need to consider as we do this. When you look at the anatomy of a stool, you'll notice that you have these cross beams in here. This is to add structure to it so that the legs don't splay apart as you sit on it. So when we want to shorten it, we have to consider how we're going to impact these. In this case, I think there's still plenty of leg here for us to shorten this a good bit without having to worry about the inside structure. So if this was sitting a little lower and we were still trying to lower it, we may have to take the stool apart in order to drill new holes, new peg holes for this to move up higher. And we'd have to shorten that as well. But we're going to start with the assumption that we can shorten this without having to impact the rest of the structure. Depending on the seating material, I might suggest that you would remove that while you work on it. We don't have to if it's not going to impede what you're trying to do, but just in case you do need to do that, you'll notice typically there's some kind of screws. This one has screws on either side of each corner, so you could take it off. Sometimes the screw will be directly underneath the structure of the top of the stool, and you would take that out. And so you may have to take the seat off and put it aside, but in our case, I don't think I have to worry about that. Now, the next thing I'll point out is that your first thought is, well, you'll just square up and cut off the bottom of the leg. But the one thing you have to understand is that typically there's a taper, meaning that the distance between here and here at the top of the stool is different than it is when you reach further down. So like the distance across this structure right here is going to be different than that. So you don't want to just mark a square line across here and cut it, because then your stool will be sitting on the inside edge of the leg. So what we want to do is put the stool on a flat surface, measure an equal distance using the flat surface as our guide, and then make our cut that way. And that way the bottom of the leg will sit square to the ground. Now, the next thing I'll point out is, it might be easier to see this way, you'll notice these legs actually have a taper at the bottom as well. So that is purely aesthetic. It's to make it look more natural, to look like a nicer piece of furniture. So you'll see that it gets from the width that it has here, it tapers down. So when we cut these off, I want to keep these in order to transfer that taper to my new cut position, and then I'll use a jigsaw in order to take that down. You'll also notice when you look at this side that the taper is not on every side. So this side of the leg is square. So this side is not tapered, but the inside of the leg is. So that we're going to note as well. And to make sure that we do it the right way, we'll make some marks on the leg so that we can line these pieces back up. Now, the first step I think that we'll need to do is to remove the feet from the bottom of the stool. So your stool likely has these little plastic pegs on the bottom. We'll take those off. So typically those are simply nailed in. Sometimes they are screws. This one is a nail. So we can grab this with a pair of pliers and give it a little twist and a tug, and we can pull those away, and then we'll be down to just the wood of the leg. You'll just grab these with a pair of pliers, give it a little twist and a little pulling motion to pull it away, and you'll see they come right off. Let's take the rest off. It might be difficult to see, but I've made a mark on the leg. So on the outside of this leg I have a 1 and a 1, and on this side a 1 and a 1. The idea is that when I cut this off, I'll be able to line up the ones from this side, and I'll know then I can mark my taper on my new cut. On the bottom side, since I'm looking at the inside of the legs from here, I mark these with a plus sign. So the idea is that I don't want to screw up and put the leg in the wrong place. Theoretically, they're all the same, so this side should be tapered exactly like this one, since this is probably manufactured in some kind of machined mill house. They probably are the same, but I thought just to be sure that I'll mark each one. But you definitely need to mark at least one and understand the orientation that you have, so that when you put it back on and mark for your taper, you'll get them in the right direction. A key question will be what height to make the stool. So without the nubs on the bottom, if we measure this, we'll see this stool is sitting at 30 inches, which is pretty typical for a bar stool that is sitting at a bar height of 42 inches. But you see, we're going to try to fit within 36. So in that case, a standard height for a bar stool on that size of a kitchen counter would be somewhere between 23 and 26 inches. So if I did it at 26, I would only have about 9 inches of space underneath the cabinet, the counter for the bar to sit. That might still be a little uncomfortable with your knee and your leg position. So I'm going to bring it down. If I want the top of the stool to be at, say, 23.5 inches, I will have to subtract that from 30, the current height, in order to come up with my distance. So in this case, I know that that is 6.5 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5. So I'm going to take 6.5 inches of the bottom of the leg off and reshape it so that this stool will sit more naturally under a kitchen height countertop. I want to point out again that the leg has to sit squarely to the floor. Now I know we're going to put the little pegs back on afterwards, and that will take up some of the distance, but just to point it out, I thought I'd put it on here. If we put the square on from this side, we'll see that the leg is mostly square, but a little bit longer on this one corner. If I put it on this side, it's a little more pronounced. So we'll see this is where the speed square is lining up down here. And so we see just a little bit extra here. So we have to take this into account when we cut our legs, in order to address the fact that we want this to sit squarely. So I'm not gonna, I'll mark it across this way, reasonably square, but I'm going to take into consideration this little bit of taper here in order to try to help them sit square on the floor. To do this, most of this work, I think, I will use a jigsaw, which is a saw that looks like this. They're pretty easy to come by. If you don't have one, you'll find them in the any big box store will have them. These have a little blade that pushes up and down, and it will let you gently make shapes. So I'll be able to do my straight cut following a line across. Then when I mark for the tapered edge, I'll be able to follow that along with the blade in order to make my taper. Then I'll use a little bit of sandpaper or my sander in order to try to bring it down to a paintable smooth, and then we'll touch these up with a little paint and we'll be back in business. So remember, we're trying to achieve this taper, which is about a 1/16 of an inch, maybe between a 1/16 and an 1/8, but we'll start with a 1/16, which means this side of the leg needs to be shorter than this side. So I measured out my 6.5 inches this way. So for this side to be shorter means I need to measure an 1/8 of an inch longer on this side. So, or 1/16 of an inch. So if I make a mark here, a 1/16 inch longer than the one I have, I can make a mark. Let's square that up. I'll make a mark at this end. So you'll see the two marks. It might be difficult to see. I'll try to zoom in. So you'll see the one mark on the right side is where it would be a square leg, but I'm going to make my line actually meet up to this side. So I'm going to mark the top line and this bottom line in this way. Oops, I slid a little bit, sorry about that. There we go, please ignore my boo-boo. Okay, so now if I put my square on here again and I square it up at the bottom of that, we'll see I'll have the same reveal up here that I have out at this end of the leg. So the inside leg is just a 1/16 of an inch shorter than the outside. So now with this line marked, I will cut across and through the leg. I will save this piece as I marked it here and here, so that I can line it back up and then get the tapered edge marked onto the new leg. Before I cut, I thought I would show you, I've outfitted my jigsaw with a wood cutting blade. They come in with different numbers of teeth. One with a lot of teeth is considered a fine blade. One with short teeth might be for metal cutting, so you want to make sure you're using a wood blade. The other thing to point out is, depending on the features of your skill saw, it will have a setting here for whether you're doing steel, hardwoods, softwood. Softwood is like 2x4s, in this case plywood. Mine has examples here, hardwood. Now this particular one, I'm gonna guess it's not a hardwood, but a 3 setting is probably gonna be closer to what I want. So I started from the bottom, 0, 1, 2, 3. So I'm gonna have it sitting at 3 in order to make my cuts. Now remember, this cut has a little bit of a taper on it. So I'm going to hold if you hold your saw square, it's going to make a square cut, obviously. So I'm going to tilt it just a little bit as I make the cut through. The other thing to pay attention to is the length of your blade. These come in different lengths. Obviously, I could have had a longer one, but this one is sufficient length where I get a nice bite into the wood. As you see, it comes through a good 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch beyond the edge. So you don't want to use one that's too short, otherwise your cut won't go all the way through. So let's pay attention to that as well. All right, I've made my cut. Now what I want to do is, notice I have my 1 and my 1, so I know if I lay this on from this side that it's the same position that I had before. So I'm going to square that up, and now I'm going to mark this, and you'll see how this mark now shows my taper. And once I'm done, I'll be able to replicate the look that the leg had, only with a shorter stand. Now, of course, the style is on this side, which, or the brace, depending what you want to call it. So I can't mark it from this side because my piece is too long, but that's okay. I can still use my scrolling variable speed saw and I'll be able to make this cut along here. I'll use my sander and make sure it's nice and smooth, and I will have my leg replicated in this position. Now I've made my cut, so if I line these back up again, we'll see that I have a pretty good shape. It might be a little different at the top. I might be able to shape it a little bit better with the sander. I did use the sander on it right quick in order to kind of knock this corner off so that it would be a little smoother or not quite as sharp, but I think I pretty well have replicated the shape here. So here's the shape of the final leg at the final length. I now just have to transfer that 3 more times, and this stool will be at the height that I want. As I work on the second one, I thought I would take a moment to talk about the wonders of an orbital sander. When you make your cuts, especially a tapered cut like this, freehand with a skill saw like that, you know, it's not going to come out perfect. And you see here, I have a little bit of an edge right at the end. But the nice thing about an orbital sander is it'll help you clean those edges up. So start with a heavy paper. I think this is an 80. So an 80 grit will take off a lot of material. I'll first use it to smooth down my edge right here. Then I'll go down to a 120 in order to do my final sand in order to fix this area. So an orbital sander will come in handy when you're trying to clean up your cuts this way. Here you'll see that same cut that I was showing you after I've hit it with an 80 grit, how I was able to smooth it out nicely. I also ticked a little bit off the corner right there because I don't want the edges to be quite so sharp, but I was able to nicely taper that a little bit better. So I'll go down in grit or up in grit size. I'll use a finer paper in order to do my final finish here, and then this leg will be done and I'll move on to the others. Here you begin to see that I've got one of the stools done, the difference in height. So this is going to be much more comfortable at a kitchen counter height versus a regular tall bar stool. I've taken this much off. So now the height will be about 23.5 inches, which is what I expected. So it should be very comfortable. You'll notice I went ahead and got my tapers in here. I might stand on that just a little bit more. And then I will apply some paint in order to try to restore the look. And I'll put the peg feet back on. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and cut the other stool. So starting with an 80, or a 60, 80, going down to a 120, and then finally ending with a 220, you end up with a nice, smooth, paintable area. So now this is ready for my finish. Once I've completed sanding the other areas, I'll put a little primer on it, and then we'll work on matching this color for our stools. Here we have our final setup. They're each 23.5, somewhere between 23.5, 23 3/4 inches tall. Actually probably closer to 24 once I put the feet back on the bottom. You'll see that I've put a little bit of primer paint on it. I'm going to go to my box store now, take a piece that I've cut off and use it to match the paint. So I'm going to get this color paint. I'll paint over my cut areas and we'll put them back into place. And here they are in place. Looks like it's a good size. Now you'll be able to sit comfortably at the counter on these modified stools. I believe the stools turned out well. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to see what Steven's doing. Thanks.